firearms.
Anyway, I'd like to be fair to it. So, take a hike.
Hi guys, good morning.
Great, thanks a lot.
Excellent.
Do you want to sit down or do you want to stand or how do you want to do this?
Oh, you just have a seat.
Just sit down right here.
Great, thank you.
Well, we appreciate this, Bill. Thank you.
Yes, right, all
I'm
right.
very
Good to see
surprised,
you
but
again.
this is good.
Are you surprised?
What do you mean surprised? Because everybody else is slamming the door in our faces. So
You know that, well, Tracy and you and I talked about these issues before.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I've done consultations across. I'm very interested in hearing from all the perspective of all Canadians and then doing what is required to keep people safe.
Okay.
right. So the majority of your platform focuses on licensed gun owners.
Well, you know, I appreciate that would be your perspective because of your position with respect to firearms. But I would suggest to you, and I believe very strongly, there's absolutely nothing in our platform that in any way impedes law-abiding firearm owners who are engaged in the activities of hunting, hunters and farmers. None of their weapons are mentioned in our platform. We have absolutely no intention to add any new impediments or bureaucratic measures for those hunters and farmers. And so to suggest that somehow we're targeting them and their weapons frankly is false. We have proposed new measures for those people who are involved in sport shooting with handguns and other restricted weapons, that those weapons need to be more securely stored. And so I have proposed measures, and frankly I learned this from some very conscientious, law-abiding firearm owners. You know, when I did the consultation, I went and spoke to people who were involved in sport shooting activities, some at an Olympic caliber level. I wanted to learn about their sport. And so I listened to them. And I talked to them about their sport, and I also talked to them about their firearms. And we talked about how very conscientious they were in securing them against theft. We also talked about people who were perhaps less conscientious, and they talked about the law needed more clarity as to what exactly was required. We often talk about safe storage, and the RCMP directives to indicate that's a non-transparent locked container or a room that's difficult to break into. And quite frankly, I am firmly of the belief that those firearms, because of the risks they pose if they're stolen, either from a retailer or from a residence, and thereby end up in the hands of criminals, represent such a risk that those weapons should be stored in a safer vault. And
So are we talking about handguns?
Yep.
You can store a handgun in a locked room?
The law and the directives put a locked room that's difficult to break into is how the RCMP directive does that. But our laws right now talk about safe storage. And we need greater clarity around secure storage. And so I propose that all restricted weapons, including all handguns, should be stored in a safe or a vault. And that allows people to continue to own handguns, to continue to use them at a range as legally authorized to do, but will significantly enhance the storage of those weapons to make them more secure and make it far more difficult for people to commit crimes with those guns to gain access to them. There are a number of other measures as well that we propose in my conversations with police chiefs across the country. And I'll just cite an example. I went up to see Chief Danny Smythe in Winnipeg. And Chief Smythe was becoming increasingly concerned with gun violence in his community. And I talked about my experience when I was the police chief in Toronto. I had an integrated guns and gangs unit we established in Toronto and also a firearms unit. Their responsibility was to do firearms verification, but they also traced the origin of all the crime guns we seized. I had an ATF officer, an FBI officer, and a U.S. Customs officer embedded right in our investigative unit because we were doing investigations on the source of those firearms on both sides of the border. And what we found is that there were a significant number of guns in our city that were being purchased legally and then sold illegally. And just as an example, there was one individual who purchased 47 handguns. Ground the
I'm
sale
familiar
was
with that
off the-
case,
The
yeah.
Winchester case, and sold them. We caught him, we sent him to jail. But that crime is only detected when they trace the origin of their crime guns. It's really important work. So I talked to Chief Smythe about it, and I was very pleased when he, at the end of the summer, he held a press conference in Winnipeg on September the 13th, in which he announced the results of the work that he was doing in Winnipeg and his people were doing in Winnipeg in their gun and gang unit, where they traced the origin of guns, and he found that a very significant portion of the guns that they were seizing on the streets of Toronto were in fact purchased legally and then sold illegally. And so I think that requires a response, and that means we need to invest in law enforcement's capacity to do that tracing. We need to make sure that there are appropriate accountability in the purchase and resale of handguns that clearly needs to be enhanced and is lacking. We need to make sure that law enforcement has the access to the information they need to do those investigations, and we need to ensure that there are appropriate penalties and consequences for people who engage in that criminal activity. Now, the fellow that was doing that in Toronto, I believe, went to jail for about 8 years. It's a pretty significant penalty. But the ways to prevent a crime, a lot of people talk about the severity of punishment, but the likelihood of getting caught and how easy it is to commit a crime are also two very significant factors, and I think we need to address those. And so we are doing that. I've also had conversations with cities across the country, and many of them have said to me, we believe that more needs to be done. Some of them, quite frankly, many of the cities, particularly in the GTA, but also in Montreal and in Lower Mainland BC, have said to us, we'd like to see these guns banned altogether. We don't see that there's any reason for anyone to have a handgun. And so I have not proposed, as you know, a ban nationwide on handguns, but we are prepared to work with mayors and cities and city councils and local police chiefs on additional measures appropriate to the risks that those cities are facing that would allow for additional restrictions within their jurisdiction that would be appropriate to their risks. And
That measure actually has been getting a lot of, there's been a lot of feedback from law enforcement that in particular, that won't work.
Well,
because you're talking about banning it in one
I
jurisdiction.
don't know who you're
where they
talking
can-
to, but let me tell you, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, which is an organization that represents all the police chiefs in the province of Ontario, they issued a statement in response to the proposals that we put forward, and they commented on these issues, and they were very supportive of a number of measures that we propose, including the assault on military-style assault rifles, and they were also supportive of working with us and with their municipalities at additional measures. And perhaps it might be useful for your listeners if they had a better understanding of it. Because sometimes the newspapers report that, we'll just let cities ban, and somebody says, well, then if you can't buy a gun in Toronto, but you can go to Richmond Hill. Let me be very clear about what we're proposing. In my conversations with the mayors, and including the mayor of Richmond Hill, by the way, we've talked about additional restrictions that a municipality might impose on the storage of a firearm. They might be able, through their bylaws and zoning, to determine where and if a firearm could be stored either in a residence. There is, some consideration to the only legal place in which those firearms can be used as a licensed range. And so, if in their jurisdiction, it may be appropriate to require that those weapons would be stored at the licensed range. That is a measure that I think could be very effective in an urban area. But I reminded them that when I went to Whitehorse and to Red Deer
Ottawa.
and to Kenora,
Most of the
well,
ranges.
and I visited a lot of ranges. Some people simply didn't have the facility to do that. In Whitehorse, they have a beautiful range in Whitehorse, but it's essentially a shed on the side of a mountain.
So is my Ottawa range.
Well, that's fine. But there are some places where the licensed rangers are perfectly capable of providing secure storage for these firearms. We could define that for them, and we could even provide support, and the municipality would do that, because and again, I think it is appropriate to allow, a local authority, and the local police and the local mayor, to take the steps necessary to keep their community safe. And if they have unique risks, unique vulnerabilities, then we should work with them to help them deal with those risks. And that does not mean a person could not own a firearm or could not engage in the sporting activity of sports shooting. But
Except with our
a semi-auto.
rifles.
Well, and again, and I've also seen your statements that, very broadly includes all semi-automatic rifles, and that's not what we've said. I appreciate that.
Do you have a list?
That's what you've said.
I would appreciate a list.
A list will be provided and presented at the appropriate time when we bring forward those new regulations. But what we are talking about.
So
Tracy-
you're asking voters to make a decision on a policy
No,
that you haven't been clear about?
let me be really clear.
Okay.
There are weapons that are designed for military purposes and have been used far too often in Canada and around the world by people who are intent, that go and find the instrument, the weapon, that is the most efficient for killing the most people at once. And those are weapons that were designed for soldiers to kill other soldiers. And so...
Except for here in Canada where they're limited to 5 rounds, Bill.
Yeah, and I'm also aware of the undertaking that Mr. Scheer made to you, that he would review those magazine capacity limits, and I have heard from many people in his party suggesting that 30-round capacity limits should be authorized. I disagree, by the way.
Okay.
Because I just simply
But the
disagree.
truth of the matter is my AR-15 that is semi-automatic and limited to 5 rounds functions no differently than my hunting rifle. Just because one is made of wood and I take it out in the forest and shoot deer with it, it still functions the exact same as my sporting rifle.
Tracy, I think a really good question you might ask is ask of the people who choose to arm themselves with those weapons when they're engaging in activities of mass murder.
I don't speak to mass murderers, so I don't have that opportunity.
But look at, the choice they make is rather clear. The AR-15 that you just mentioned is overwhelmingly the first weapon of choice for people who have engaged in those
It's the most
activities.
common rifle in the world, of
Well,
course.
and it's also overwhelmingly the most common weapon used by mass murderers.
Not in Canada.
Not in Canada.
We have a
And in the
unique
United
situation
States,
here.
they've had the overwhelming majority of multiple victim public shootings that occurs in the United States actually occurs with handguns, but the AR-15 has been used, but there's 10 to 12 million of them in circulation.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that.
Right.
And I will tell you...
That's why it shows up.
I would suggest to you, Rod, there is a very fundamental but very significant difference between gun laws and gun culture in Canada and the United States. The American, with the Second Amendment, and I have great respect for the Americans, but with their Second Amendment, they have a constitutional right to bear arms, and they have a constitutional right to bear arms, and the intent being for self-protection. That's not the law in Canada. It has never been the law in Canada, and quite frankly, I very much believe that Canada does not want to adopt an American gun culture and American gun laws.
I don't think anyone's asking for that.
No, I wish that was true, but I've heard your advocacy and from many of your members saying that gun ownership should be a right, like as a property right. And I've also heard, unfortunately, and I think it is most unfortunate, some of your members suggesting that they need to carry those weapons for personal protection. That's not the law in Canada.
Our members don't speak for the CCFR. Only
That's-
Rod and I speak for the CCFR.
Well,
That's right.
Then I think it would really be important for you to provide that clarity because many of your members,
I can't hold
unfortunately-
you responsible for things that Liberal voters say to me, right? I have Liberal voters sending me emails hoping that, my kids shoot me in the face or I become a victim of violence so I can really understand. I would never hold you responsible
Tracy, I'll just
for
tell you
your
my own personal
supporters.
belief. I believe that firearm ownership in Canada, in the United States it is a constitutional right, but in Canada it's not a right, it's a privilege.
I'm aware of that. We're not debating
and
that.
it's very much a privilege earned by people who obey our laws and restrictions. And those laws and restrictions have been put in place to fulfill our greatest responsibility, which is
And we
public
do.
safety.
We follow those
And we
rules,
do.
no matter how ridiculous they are.
Has
without issue.
anyone in your party or in your government been able to demonstrate that licensed gun owners represent a disproportionate risk to public safety?
No, and
No, I
and
don't
in
think they
fact-
have,
and
right?
In fact, Rod, if I may, I have been very upfront and clear that the overwhelming majority of firearm owners in this country are in fact law-abiding, responsible, and conscientious about
Mm-hmm.
how they acquire their firearms, how they store them, how they use them, and how they dispose of them.
But we're still going to have them confiscated
no,
from us?
And no, ma'am. What we have said, though, is that sometimes their weapons get in the hands of people who are not conscientious, who are not responsible, who are not law-abiding. And so we are going to take the steps necessary to make sure that those weapons are secure against theft or diversion. And by the way, I very much appreciate it. I am also responsible for border security. We saw, for over a decade, significant cuts in the staffing and the resources of our our Canada Border Security Agency and the RCMP that conducted organized crime investigations. They got shut down. The Integrated Proceeds of Crime Units, 12 of them across this country, were shut down in 2013. The officers that were dedicated to conducting, in partnership with me when I was the chief in Toronto, the investigations into international cross-border smuggling of firearms, those officers were depleted of staff and resources as a result of budget
So
cuts.
maybe we'd be better to focus on that kind of measure.
Well, you know what? It's not an either or. You must do both.
Why must we do both?
the-
Why must we?
Well, that's where
take
we disagree,
firearms?
right?
And I appreciate that. You are
Yeah.
advocates for the guns.
No,
I'm
we're
ad-
advocates
No, we're
for gun
advocates for
owners.
licensed
And
gun
I'm
owners.
an advocate
Gun
for
owners.
public safety.
Yeah, so are we.
So are we.
And
Yeah.
so here we are. There are 3 sources for those guns. Some of them are, a lot of them are smuggled across the border. Undeniable, and frankly, I've conducted some of the largest investigations ever conducted into international gun smuggling in this country, and we have arrested very many people under my leadership at Toronto Police Service
I
for gun
applaud you for
smuggling.
that.
We had a firearms unit. We had dedicated resources to do that, and we conducted those investigations. Since I went to Ottawa, we have put nearly $90 million back into border security directly related to firearms. We've been restoring the capacity and the resources and staffing of the CBSA and the RCMP to do that important work as it needs to be done. We've invested in technologies, new X-ray technologies for guns and cargo that's coming across the border to keep those guns out of our country. But it's also important, and by the way, dogs. You know, it's a low-tech solution, but it's really effective. And so we've significantly increased and invested in
So
that.
that's one.
And we're restoring the RCMP's capacity to work on both sides of the border. You know, I found it rather interesting. I heard someone suggest today, why don't we have a border task force on firearms? It's called the Integrated Border Enforcement Team. It's been in place since 1996. All right, and I had officers in the IBETS teams here in Ontario, but they existed across the country. So somebody's suggesting we should have a solution that we have, but it's got to be adequately resourced and adequately staffed. The other guys
We
cut
don't
that,
disagree
we're
on
putting
those.
it up.
You know we don't disagree
I know
on
you
that,
don't,
Bill.
but because we're all concerned about illegal guns coming into this country and the
Absolutely,
gun
of
violence.
course.
And I would expect law-abiding gun owners are very concerned about their guns or any gun getting in the hands of a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
But we also know that guns have three sources. Many of them are a result of theft. And
Some, not many.
Well-
I would not say many. The majority.
Well, hold on,
of
hold on.
crime
One
guns
at a
is
time.
illegal.
So some are coming across the border.
some are coming across the
And then
border.
some are stolen from licensed gun owners,
and retailers.
And retailers.
Yeah. And
so,
quite frankly,
so
if
is
those
it,
guns were properly stored in a safer vault, they'd be far more difficult to steal.
so this is overall. You're saying that people that have their gun in a gun vault don't get their gun stolen.
I think it's far less likely. You know, there's a couple of ways to prevent a crime. Make it far more difficult to catch, to commit the crime, safer vault.
Mm-hmm.
Make it far more likely to get caught. Effective investments in police resources and real consequences
So
when you do.
so the people that get their guns stolen,
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones to blame for those guns
They're-
ending up
They're
on the street.
victims of that
And
crime,
they-
actually.
Because they're victims of crime
And
that we haven't been able to. We have a crime problem.
Rod, you
The
know,
crime problem
Rod, I
continues.
appreciate your rhetoric, but I have never
Well,
suggested
Bill, I'm listening to yours
I know, but I've
for
never suggested-
10 minutes straight, right? So I'm looking for a conversation. I mean,
the camera at me. I assume you wanted me to
Exactly.
speak about this.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you.
I was
my
hoping to have a
position.
conversation about
Well,
it. That's why.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, well, you know,
Because I have all your clips. I saved them.
well, you know, you
And
can do
they're very good.
But,
Yeah.
but I'll share another one with you. We have never suggested that people who are victims of a crime should in any way be punished. We want to require them to take the steps necessary so as not to have those weapons stolen.
But you're taking their guns away, Bill. That's the problem,
Well, no,
right?
the only guns we're taking
Are you
away
are you taking away my semi-autos? Are you
no.
going to take them from me?
I don't know what you own, and so the
I own
answer-
AR-15s and a
Well,
variety of
I will
other
tell you
non-restricted
that The
semi-autos.
AR-15 and many other weapons were designed for military use. They were designed for soldiers to kill other soldiers.
Well, they were.
And
The
I will
AR-15 was
tell
actually
you-
a hunting rifle that
and-
was adopted by the U.S.
well,
Army in the middle 50s.
It's a U.S. Army rifle, and it's a very efficient weapon for killing people. Mass murderers know that
Any
too.
firearm is in the wrong hands, Bill.
This
That's
is the
what we
thing,
need to
right?
focus.
Well, and-
So is a bolt action at distance, right?
Well, and
Look at
but
the Parliament Hill
I'm
shooter.
talking about killing a lot of people.
The Parliament Hill shooter was a lever action, and he got right into the library, Bill.
and didn't kill 25 people, like was done at Sandy Hook, and didn't kill 50 people, like was
We
done
don't
at
have
Christchurch.
full auto
This is your time. This
AR-15s,
isn't.
Bill.
This
We're in
isn't the
Canada.
United States.
And again, I believe very firmly we can disagree on this. There's no place for those weapons in our society. They were not designed for hunting purposes. They were designed for military purposes. And I'm okay with soldiers having them because that's a legitimate and well-regulated use of those weapons.
You don't think they're
But-
well regulated, the ones that we own? You understand the laws surrounding restricted
Yes, ma'am.
firearms,
Yes, ma'am. I've
right?
enforced those laws for many years, and I
Okay,
do
so
know.
they're fairly well regulated, Bill.
I will tell you, I don't think they're adequately. I don't think a weapon that dangerous has a place in civil society.
How
We
is it
disagree.
more dangerous than my hunting rifle, which is a far larger, faster caliber?
I will just tell you, I do not believe those weapons which were designed for military use, for soldiers to kill other soldiers, have a place in a civil society. And I firmly believe, and I believe most Canadians agree, that there is no place for them here.
What about
This
a
is a discussion.
308?
We've also seen.
What
we've
about
also
a 308, Bill?
we've
That's
also-
a sniper
I don't-
caliber,
I don't
and we
read-
use it for moose,
Charles,
so.
I have to tell you, I don't want to argue this gun versus that gun, and although I appreciate that.
But we're doing that
I
with
appreciate that's what
legislation if you
really
win,
wanna do.
right?
What I've said is that there is a class of firearms that were designed for military use, not for hunting and not for public possession. That's not what they were intended for. And I believe that there's no place for those in our society. I also believe that there's very strong evidence from a number of other jurisdictions where they have made those guns not available by prohibiting them and banning them. They've created a safer situation and reduced the incidence of gun violence. I also will tell you that as I traveled across the country, and I talked not to you about this because I know you have a very different perspective, but I talked to a number of people that own those firearms, and they said to me, Bill, if you're going to prohibit these weapons, we can't bequeath them, we can't sell them, and we can't use them. And they said that the right way to treat us, the fairest way to treat us, because we purchased those guns as authorized under law, and if you are going to prohibit them and take them from us, then we would like to be compensated. I agree with that. That's fair.
I would not like to be compensated. I would like to keep the property that I legally acquired, that I use safely, I follow all the rules without issue, I enjoy my sport. I would just like to
Tracy,
keep the property that I've acquired.
I understand your perspective and what you like and what you enjoy. This is a decision for the Canadian people on what kind of a society they want to live in, and I will tell you the people I've spoken to right across this country, including the police who are responsible for keeping people safe, they believe that we should undertake any measure that will be effective in keeping us safe, and I believe this.
What about the Chiefs of Police
Yeah, they
Association
don't-
of Canada?
Well,
Did Chief Palmer, did he agree with you?
No, but first of all, the Ontario Chiefs have come up with a very strong position. Chief
That's
Palmer,
one province, right?
Chief Palmer and I have met on this, and I would never presume to speak for him, by the way. They have a firearms advisory committee. It's headed up by Chief Evan Bray in Regina. I've spoken to them about the measures that we propose to take. We did discuss the efficacy of a handgun ban, and I listened very carefully to their opinions on this. But we have also talked a great deal about the weapon that was used to kill 3 Mounties in Moncton, the weapon that was used to kill 2 police officers and 2 civilians in Fredericton, about the weapon that was carried into the Quebec Mosque, about the weapon that has been used, and we've had a number of conversations, the weapon that was used in Sandy Hook to slaughter a bunch of little kids, or to call
Okay, that's the United States,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
in the United
But
States.
You know what,
We
just-
don't-
We'll stick to our country. So we've had a handful of multiple victim public
Let us stick to our
shootings.
responsibility for public safety,
Yeah.
and I will tell you.
So
I
solve your
spent-
crime
I
problem,
spent-
and then all these problems go away, and
Yeah.
I get to keep my property.
Yeah,
I don't have it.
None of these measures addresses the actual problems that we've got going on in Canada, Bill. We've got violent criminals that are being turned back
well,
out.
You know all about that. I spent my life dealing with crime and violence.
So you know.
Well, I know a number of things. I know that we cannot deal with the gun violence in this country if we're afraid to talk about the guns. And I know you don't want to talk about guns.
No,
I know
we're
you-
here to talk about
We're here
guns.
to talk about
you
guns.
want
I
to talk about-
came to you.
Yeah, you want to talk about not doing anything about guns?
No, we want
That's
to
not
talk
at all.
about doing something about
Our
it.
group is the only group in Canada that acknowledges that there's a place for a licensing system. So you're actually talking to the reasonable gun lobby right now,
Listen,
right? So we're not the cold dead hands group. Okay, so we put up with a continuous eligibility screening every single day in order just to have the privilege of maintaining our property.
I'm glad you talk about eligibility screening, because I'd like to
Okay.
raise another issue. People who obtain, because I've seen different opinions coming from your members, people who obtain all the appropriate licenses to acquire a gun, we have a pretty extensive background checks. In Bill C-71, we just significantly enhanced those background checks, and I know that you've
It hasn't been
advocated.
implemented.
But I know you've advocated against us undoing, or somebody undoing that, but I disagree. But one of the concerns that we have is that, people's life experiences change. And if someone gets into a situation where they're in a serious domestic violence relationship, or a very serious neighbor dispute, or if they are suffering from an illness that resulted in them being a risk to their own safety or to others, perhaps they're suicidal, or if they're online advocating hate and violence against a vulnerable group, a religious minority, or whatever, whoever, then under those circumstances, I think it's entirely appropriate that we put in place the mechanism to immediately render that situation
We
safe.
have that.
Yeah,
It's not here?
Yeah, no.
It's in the
Yeah.
Firearms Act.
Yeah, no, we don't.
It's in the Firearms Act.
Yeah,
No,
the
it-
conditions for which a revocation or review is right in the
Yeah,
Firearms
and-
Act. I
and-
spoke to the Director General of Public Safety about it.
Yeah, so did I. Section
Yeah.
11704 of the Criminal Code, the Firearms Act, and yes, I'm very familiar with it, and I also know its limitations. I know it's significant limitations. And so I've been working with the law enforcement community, but also the medical community, and with victims of crime. And we want to make sure that the people who have the information about the risk, those red flags that go up, have the ability to bring forward an issue, not just for the long and extensive process of revocation, but immediate suspension. To suspend the license and to remove
That exists
firearms
today.
from the
It
situation.
exists now.
Well,
They can come and
But you know
suspend your
what? Here,
license.
hold on, Bill. We're not fighting you on that. We want a safer Canada too. We're not fighting you on that.
okay, good.
Well, we're
You know,
talking
if you,
specific.
if you endorse that, I'd be pleased to hear that.
Yeah, well, I have no problem with things that make sense. But the fact that the government can't solve their problems, can't solve their crime problem, so they want to come to me and take property from me without justification, then that's a problem for me because I haven't done anything but follow the rules to the letter
Well, and-
forever.
And I hope you'll continue to do that. And what I have proposed in our platform is to implement additional rules that will make it far more difficult for your guns to end up in the hands of someone who would commit a crime. I don't suspect for a minute, I'm absolutely certain, Rod, you are a responsible firearm owner and obey all the rules. We wish to bring forward additional rules which I believe are necessary to make it far less likely that your firearms can be stolen or otherwise diverted.
Well, it can't be stolen because you're going to take a bunch of them,
Well,
right? That's an easy
we're
fix.
talking primarily about handguns, and there will be additional restrictions which require that all of them be stored in a safe or a vault. And if you agree with that, I'm glad, because I think it's the right thing to do. And the majority of very conscientious handgun owners that I've spoken to agree as well, because most of them take those very conscientious steps to secure their firearms because they know the risk and they value those weapons.
That's great, but what about the 250,000 rifles that you want to take by force from people that haven't done anything to deserve it? That's our big issue,
You know,
right?
I will tell you, I heard some of the rhetoric, and it came from you actually,
Mm-hmm.
suggesting that, you know, that there would be gun battles and children would be hurt. I think it's grossly irresponsible.
Well,
No, honestly, I think that's
you
grossly
watch
irresponsible.
then if you watch the video yourself, you know exactly what I was saying.
I think that's grossly irresponsible. And-
Really?
Yeah, I do. And
It happened in New Zealand.
And
It
quite,
happened
and quite
within a
frankly,
week
quite frankly,
of his video.
shameful. And I will tell you, I disagree with you completely, because I believe that Canadian firearm owners will obey the law, because that's who they are. They're Canadians and they're law abiding. And if the law says that these weapons are going to be prohibited, I have every expectation that the overwhelming majority of firearm owners will obey the law.
Well, it sounds pretty rhetorical to me as well, but you know, I hope you're right.
So
And
it's
your
an easy
comments is
part.
suggesting that some of them would fire on the police.
I never
But
said that.
children-
No, never
I never said that.
Never said that, Bill.
See, Bill,
That's
see, that's a
inaccurate.
lie.
That's a lie.
That's a lie.
You know,
So far, not only do you actually don't know the storage requirements for a restricted firearm, and you said twice on TV that you can just take your handgun and put it in a locked room. That's untrue. You have two legal ways to store a handgun in a safe, a vault, or unloaded, secure locking device on the firearm in a locked case. So
it's actually-
not in a room that's securely locked. You're thinking non-restricted firearms. So someone that's enforced the law apparently for so long, you'd think you'd know even the smallest detail about that. And then you just told me I said something that I didn't say, and it's on video. You could even go look it up yourself. See, this is a problem, right? And I'm just looking for honest discussion, honest conversation with honest people that really want to solve the problem, and you just told me a lie. That I said that people are going to open fire on the police. I never said that in my life. Not in my life. The video is right there on your computer. So
I don't watch your videos,
now,
Rod. I have to confess.
well, apparently you just did. You just told me that you did.
It's been reported to me.
Oh, so
that- that you
hearsay.
said- No, but I've seen it written that you said, implied that people would be, children could be injured in the crossfire of this thing. And quite frankly, I think that
No, I never said crossfire.
and false.
And the problem is when you pay the media $600 million to tell your story, this is exactly what you get. So people are running around out there thinking that I'm saying that the people are going to open up on police.
And you digress.
Yeah.
No,
I'm just telling you.
I wish you a safe journey. as you
Well,
travel
I
across
appreciate
the
your time.
Thank you.
Thank
We're going
you.
to go visit some more of your colleagues.
Good.
Yes, thank you, Bill. I appreciate it.
Let's go get the bus.
As soon as you call them on the lie,
Oh, yeah,
it's
that's it.
over,
It's
right?
over.
It's right there in your computer. You have it. Well, thanks for stopping in.
Get out.
Yeah. Well, isn't that interesting? So he invites us in. And that was fantastic. I admired his guts
Yeah.
for doing that, where everybody else slammed their door in our faces. But then he went on a non-stop diatribe of talking points, Liberal Party talking points, everything I've heard him say on TV 100 times. And he talked over us the majority of the time. So he wouldn't actually have to answer any questions. So finally, we started asserting ourselves, started asking questions. And the minute that it got uncomfortable, that it wasn't just an opportunity for talking points, boom, it's over. And especially when I called him on his lie that Canadians are going to open up on law enforcement if they ban guns. I never said anything of the sort. It's sitting there on the internet, and it's just this is what you get. And I thought for a minute that we were actually going to get a real conversation.
I always knew it was going to go exactly like that, because I know even at the town hall in Durham, when Larry Miller got Bill Blair to come out, he limited people to 2 minutes to their questions, but also limited Blair to 2 minutes to answers for that exact reason. Because what he'll do is he'll just roll out those Liberal talking points the entire time and not let you get a word in, right? And this way it's always just him spouting, the crafted lines for him. It's interesting to me that, as somebody with his esteemed experience in law enforcement, and now he's the Minister of Organized Crime and Border Safety and whatever else, that his answer to stopping crime, to stopping the flow of the very small amount of firearms that are stolen from legal Canadian firearms owners, is to just take them first. Like, this is his answer. This is it. This is the fix. Unbelievable.
And it was all appeal. Yeah, it was all appeal to emotion, right? I'm interested in the safety of Canadians. Like, who isn't interested in the safety of Canadians? It's always the same thing. Obviously, if you don't disagree, or if you don't agree with me, you somehow don't want a safer Canada. And this is why I'm impressed that he had the guts to invite us and the cameras in, but he just is. Nobody's capable of just sitting down and talking like two people that are concerned about a problem that want to solve it. And the minute that we started to get to ask questions and he started to get painted in the corner, it was over. I was surprised. I guess I wasn't surprised, but I was surprised at the same time. I thought, hey, this could be good. I don't know.
No, I knew full well. I mean, I think if any of these people along these travels are going to talk to us, it's Bill Blair that they'd want to give the A-OK to go ahead and speak with us. So I wasn't altogether that surprised. I was surprised he was in. But he's not door knocking, so that makes sense. But I was not surprised. My experience with Bill, which is pretty extensive, is that's exactly the type of interaction that you have, where he spouts the entire time, talks down to you, hovers over you. He knows everything, you know nothing, and this is all your fault. And when you disagree, get out. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's the conversation. Well, we got a conversation. It wasn't the conversation we wanted. We mostly were on the receiving end of that. But anyways, the search is still on for Liberal integrity on the firearms file.
It's very elusive. It's like the white Bengal tiger. That's been
found
rumored.
It.
Yeah.
All
but
right.
We'll keep going.
Let's go. We'll get on the bus.
And so you don't miss out, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube.com. This is Coat of Arms.